To Al Manara International Conference Center, Cairo in Egypt, venue of the Intra-African Trade Fair Conference 2018. Over the next half hour, we'll bring you highlights of landmark signings, trade deals, partnerships, exhibitions, which took place over the week-long event. Welcome. I am Christy Cole. Come with me.
The Intra-African Trade Fair is an instrument we are using to implement our Intra-African trade strategy. And it's also linked to the African Continental Free Trade Area, which also derived largely from boosting the Intra-African Trade Initiative of the African Union.
We set out to bring in together buyers and sellers. But it wasn't just to bring buyers and sellers in itself, it's a way to engage and build trade information. The trade information that we've identified as a weakness in the intra-African trade, people don't know about what their neighbors are selling or buying. Kenya will go to New Zealand to buy rawhide that Burundi is selling. And Nigerians will go to overseas to buy outside the continent to buy pharmaceuticals, but Egypt is a hub of pharmaceuticals. Those are the kind of things that we want to divide because we actually need to promote intra-African trade.
Described as an instrument of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, the Intra-African Trade Fair aims not only to share timely trade information across the continent, but to also spur its implementation. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa estimates that the implementation of the AFCFTA could raise intra-African trade up 52% by the year 2022, from levels currently put at 15 to 18%.
It's important to announce that this is not just an exhibition, but it's also a conference, there are B2Bs, and importantly, there's a virtual trade fair, so that those who are not able to come physically can exhibit their goods on the virtual trade fair, and be a part of the what we're doing as a comprehensive program.
The lack of trade information is perhaps more constraining than the infrastructure, because today Africa's trade is about $1 trillion. What it tells you is that the infrastructure available is able to carry $1 trillion of that trade. The question is, why is it that intra-African trade share of that $1 trillion is just $170 billion? Why is it not $400 billion?
I think one must commend Afreximbank for putting together this initiative for the very first time ever, for bringing African together, and for traders, for businesses, bank, financial institution to see and discuss how we can foster intra-Africa trade, which is today at 15%. Intra-Africa trade is at a very low base compared to Europe, which is at 67%. So we're quite excited. We're happy to be here. We're looking forward to talking to a lot of partners, how we can potentially do business together, see what are their needs and how best we can help on the financing side to promote intra-Africa trade. So
really one of the most amazing events. It's really combine all Africa together from all countries.
While acknowledging efforts so far invested by governments across Africa, participants who lauded the Afreximbank for its efforts at encouraging public-private sector partnership called on leaders across the continent to look beyond protectionism and provide more incentives for intra-African and cross-border trade.
The truth is we can do more as African entrepreneurs, as the private sector in Africa, if we have commensurate support from our government. But the truth also is that things are improving. Where we are today compared to how things were 10 years ago, you can see that our governments are gradually becoming very, very enthusiastic to see success in the private sector. They are now realizing that the success in the private sector brings success to the entire city.
We're glad to see that they're now going beyond the regional framework agreement to promote a continental free trade agreement, but we do believe that there's a need for more execution. The government has to work with the private sector, work with the banks, work with the financial institutions and investors to see what are the gaps in terms of infrastructure and what can be done to fund this gap to enable trade.
I believe that Africa is now talking to itself, looking at key issues that have for many years impeded trade and investment in the continent. I believe that we are indeed taking the right step now towards transformation of the continent.
I think it is seminal that we're talking about the biggest free trade area since the World Trade Organization, since WTO effectively. And that has a requirement for movement of people and goods on the continent of Africa.
I think you got to commend the government. They're very slow, and I think Africa has a history of protectionism. There's been a lot of talk. I think those free trade agreement has been talked about for the last 40 years in terms of policy, so we see some of the writing. But I think now with the flow of information, with the digitalization, with the democratization of information, I mean, government has seen that trade, or intra-Africa trade, is taking place. It's shaping up with or without them.
You've got to create a more knowledgeable public sector that sees its own best interests as advanced in a private sector role that facilitates trade across borders.
Talks at the week-long event cut across harnessing intra-African trade promotion initiatives, using trade to achieve economic transformation, and what needs to be done to achieve concrete results under the AFCFTA.
We have, if you look at COMESA, you have SADC, you have ECOWAS, the EAC, they're all over the place. How can we pull them together to make the most of intra-Africa trade?
There's so much we can do together. When you think about the fact that the trade finance gap on the continent is about 120 billion US dollars. The infrastructure gap, incidentally, my other panelists are also more focused on infrastructure, is about $90 billion. The gap is huge. There's a place to collaborate and partner together to try and come together to try and breach the gap.
The first thing we need to ask ourselves is, why is it that our level of trade is so low? Some say around 15%, while in other parts of the world, like Latin America, 20%, in Europe, 67%, and Asia, 58%. We have infrastructural difficulties and challenges. Traveling from Togo to Niger would take you 6 hours. I mean, it shouldn't be happening. So as development banks, we have a mandate to reduce poverty, and to ensure that our region is integrated in the global economy.
We in Afreximbank, we recognize some of the, a lot of the challenges facing intra-African trade, and I totally agree with you that payment is an issue, multiplicity of currencies, and even the fact that you have to pay for your goods in foreign exchange. And which is why a lot of the panels we're running together with the African Union and some other agencies like UNECA are actually dealing with some of the things that we're tackling.
do we have innovation and strategy in the technology space at the forefront of bank policies at the moment as they look to the future?
Yes, they do. They do. We have them. And don't forget that most of the people who are working in the banks are tech savvy, you know, and they are also the central banks. They are not sitting down and watching the space. They are raising their own game and bringing on board young people who can understand better and match the fintech companies word for word. And also, you know that most of the fintech companies go to these banks to poach staff because the banks at the bank office, they understand, you know, the technologies and the techniques behind it. And so they use, it's a synergy. And I see it as a win-win for everybody at the end of the day.
Speed up, scale up, and synergize. I'm going to use that as a quote that we're going to take out of this forum as well. Robert, we have time. I mean, you know, fintech is changing the game in terms of time horizons. And again, it's about whether the technological solutions are going to leapfrog. They're not even going to let the legacy systems stand a chance when it comes to reworking the central payment and settlement systems across the continent.
There's areas where you'll see you know, fintech and technology leapfrogging and sort of creating the new paradigm, and you'll find certain areas where traditional, and I use the word traditional loosely in that because I think traditional banking itself is changing, but you'll see areas where traditional banking will still play pretty much a very important role.
The banks within Africa, especially the large indigenous banks, have a wide network of clients who they provide other facilities to, and once they have the ability to trade any African currency from the banks, I think that will be preferred.
You're watching highlights of activities at the Intra-African Trade Fair Conference 2018. There's more to come after the break. Stay with us. Create, connect, measure and deliver. Steps identified here at the Intra-Africa Trade Fair 2018 as vital to encouraging Africa-centered trade flows. Yes, we have seen some major signings amounting to billions of US dollars. One of them, $1 billion Nigeria-Africa Trade Investment Program. Another $200 million US dollars Afreximbank Togo Industrial Development Park Agreement. Exhibitions running alongside workshops, B2B, as well as country day features.
Tempo Group is one of the largest manufacturing companies in Nigeria. This is a 20 million euro term loan facility. It has now been signed. They will exchange documents. Congratulations, gentlemen.
Following Tempo Group's signing with Afreximbank, other major signings included a $500 million global facility in favor of El Suwedi, a partnership agreement between Tello and DB Engineering and Consulting, another between Lokil Group of Tunisia and Unionair Egypt facilitated by Afreximbank, and a $600 million financing agreement between Hares Holding and the Africa Export-Import Bank.
We cannot industrialize Africa if we don't trade intra-Africa. Promoting intra-Africa trade therefore means promoting small, medium-scale enterprises and capacitizing the big companies we have in Africa to be able
to produce what we need to trade.
We want to create a new railway company that offers the full scope of the railway know-how of Deutsche Bahn to the African continent.
And that partnership basically brings the full capacity of Deutsche Bahn onto the continent of Africa, where we can conceptualize rail projects, develop rail projects, and implement and operate and maintain railway projects.
This is just a dam, Fuji Dam in Tanzania. We have signed this dam as a EPC contracting business with the Tanzanian government. It's around $2.9 billion. It's a partnership between us and Arab contractors, one of the leaders of also contracting in the region. And Afreximbank is working with us on the, is just trying to help us in the financing of this project.
Other high points of the Intra-African Trade Fair included conclusion of the Instrument of Ratification of Southern African Development Community and the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA Free Trade Area, arguably described as a trailblazer of discussions around large free trade areas across Africa.
Well, the instrument that we handed over was the Instrument of Ratification of the SADC COMESA East African Community Free Trade Area. So it's a sizable block, and it was the first trailblazer of the broadening of integration efforts. So as the Secretary General of COMESA was saying, who is the current chair, this is the fast tracking of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. It is also, I think, very, very important that the tripartite is conceived of within a development integration arrangement.
Nigeria's trade negotiator Chiedu Osakwe gave an update on the country's position on the AfCFTA.
We have now developed a rules-based trade remedy safeguards that would safeguard the Nigerian economy against injurious trade practices, transshipment, dumping, and injurious practices of the sort. Secondly, we now also have a trade office. This was one of the president's directives. Nigeria had never had a dedicated office for trade negotiations. I mean, we sort of ambled all over the place, and we didn't do it properly. Now, based on the president's directive, we have a dedicated office and we have specialists. Thirdly, we now have a mechanism that's ready to go with regard to consulting with stakeholders in real time, getting their inputs on trade. We're finalizing the draft elements of a 21st century trade policy for Nigeria. I think we've done the things that we needed to do. Now we are putting together a report. It's actually being finalized that will be sent up to His Excellency Mr. President. This time it will be different for Nigeria. Engaging in trade policy, we are now doing it correctly.
Focused conversations with a former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, and living football legend Didier Drogba were also high points of the event. While Chief Obasanjo focused on the impact of an enhanced intra-African trade on the continent's GDP, Didier Drogba's discussion touched on his life beyond football and his entrepreneurship drive.
We cannot be talking of trading when we are not producing. Something that we have in abundance is sun.
Yes.
And nobody, no continent in the world has as much. Now, another thing that I will talk about, which is part of energy, is general infrastructure, particularly transportation. Now we talk of African continental open sky, well, of land infrastructure and transportation, coastal shipping. I believe that if we have thriving coastal shipping program and system, we in fact increase intra-African trade.
An Intra-Africa Trade Fair as well. I want to ask you something about Intra-Africa Trade.
All these trades are done between
most of them are done between Africans and other continents. We have the potential. I think we have everything in our hands. It's just a matter of believing in ourselves.
Participating countries had special days dedicated to showcasing their culture and investment opportunities within their countries. For Nigeria's Trade Minister, it was an opportunity to highlight the country's ease of doing business agenda.
Events like this help boost the potential of a large single African market. We believe that these agreements and MOUs are evidence of increasing investor confidence and understanding of the opportunities Nigeria represents. We understand what investors want, and the President Muhammadu Buhari administration is committed to progressively making Nigeria one of the easiest places to do business in Africa and indeed the entire world.
Attendees seized each opportunity for a conversation to identify structural and cultural loopholes working against the growth of intracontinental trade and profit solutions.
A lot of the trade between African countries, are not documented. A lot of things need to be done about that. Governments are looking at this.
This is also an opportunity to find new sources of funding. Suggest maybe new sources of funding and put maybe buyers, sellers and investors all together in one place. We all agree that the free zone agreement is, at the end of the day, a positive thing. We should work towards implementing it. It's going to take time, but we need to start somewhere and we need to start now.
Now that we are talking to each other in Africa, I think we have a basis now to invest in areas that will generate jobs, that will create wealth, that will lead to real economic transformation in our respective countries.
I was at the trade fair, the exhibition center, and I couldn't believe what I saw coming out of Africa. We need to industrialize Africa to develop, and in promoting platforms like this and associations like this and events like this help indeed to make this a reality.
It is a great opportunity to network. You get to see people doing similar things. You get to exchange ideas. You get to see best practices from other places.
Afreximbank says this will be a continuing conversation as the event will now hold every 2 years across the continent. The next Intra-Africa Trade Fair in the year 2020 will be held in Rwanda.
And that's the way we want to keep it going. Keep it going, again, to bring about buyers and sellers across Africa, and from outside of Africa, and those who are interested in selling investment goods and are interested in doing business with Africa.
This is time for Africa. A few years ago, it would have maybe it would have looked crazy to contemplate this. But we contemplated this, we exceeded our own expectations. It shows the hunger all across the line in terms of the large companies, the small companies, the medium companies, across all sectors, to trade more amongst themselves within Africa. I also see the synergy between the political and the business. Huge political support for this, huge business support for it. And all those combined to give us the success we've seen today.
Well, the numbers look very, very, very good. We had a target of 1,000 exhibitors. Over 1,100 came up on the day we opened the doors. We had a target of business transactions of $25 billion. We are close to $30 billion. And almost 100 exhibitors went into discussions to have long-term supply contracts. So we are very, 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 very happy. And we went around to talk to the exhibitors, and they expressed the happiness that they were given a platform where they could exchange their offers with others and make connections.
Ground activities at the Intra-African Trade Fair Conference 2018 are over. But when can businesses and people across the continent expect to see the impact of trade partnerships, deals and agreements reached at the event? Now that's a conversation the continent must sustain for impact. You have just watched highlights of activities at the Intra-African Trade Fair Conference 2018 held in Manara, Cairo, Egypt. Many thanks to you for watching. I am Christy Cole from the CNBC Africa team, and it's goodbye.